Renaissance. You probably picture Italy, right? Art, philosophy, all that. But over in England, this rebirth wasn't some gentle awakening. It was a full-on cultural explosion, forged in the fire of religious war, political chaos, and some seriously radical new ideas. So let's dive into what lit the fuse.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? It seems completely backward. How on earth did a nation that was literally tearing itself apart manage to create art that we still celebrate today? I mean, think about it. The country is in turmoil over religion, and yet somehow it produces Shakespeare, Spencer, and Marlowe. How does a kingdom on the brink of collapse become the birthplace of a literary golden age?
Okay, so to understand this, we've got to go back in time. Our story really kicks off in a kingdom that is an absolute mess. It's 1547, and the larger-than-life King Henry VIII has just died. Now, you remember him. He's the one who broke England away from the Catholic Church. But his death? It didn't solve a thing. Nope. In fact, it just cranked up the chaos and threw the entire nation into this really deep, really dangerous state of uncertainty. And what came next was this insane religious whiplash. First, Henry's young son, Edward VI, takes over and shoves the country hard towards a radical form of Protestantism. But then he dies young, and his half-sister Mary I grabs the throne and yanks the country violently right back to Catholicism. You have to imagine what this was like for the average person. This wasn't some distant political debate. We're talking about life, death, and where your soul was going to spend eternity. And Mary wasn't messing around. Her methods were absolutely brutal. In just 5 short years on the throne, she had around 300 Protestants executed for heresy, many of them burned at the stake. It was this terrifying persecution that earned her that infamous nickname we all still know today, Bloody Mary. This was the violent world this golden age was born from.
But then, in 1558, things change. The bloodshed finally comes to an end. Mary dies, and her half-sister Elizabeth takes the throne, kicking off what would become a golden age. Now, she inherited a nation that was just exhausted, traumatized, but her leadership provided the one thing the arts desperately needed to flourish, a little bit of stability.
Elizabeth's real stroke of genius was her ability to find a middle path. She created a moderate Protestant church that, for the most part, people could live with. Look, it wasn't perfect, nobody was 100% happy, but it worked. It calmed the religious wars, it started to unify the country, and it gave people the space to forge a new, more confident English identity. But that new identity was about to face the ultimate test. Because in 1588, Philip II of Spain, who was not only Mary's old husband, but also Europe's most powerful Catholic ruler, decided he'd had enough. He sent a massive naval fleet, the so-called Invincible Spanish Armada, with one simple goal: to invade and crush Protestant England for good. And this was the turning point. Seriously. Against all the odds, England's smaller, more nimble navy completely outmaneuvered the massive armada. They used these brilliant, clever tactics, like setting their own ships on fire and sending them into the Spanish fleet to just shatter their formation. It was an incredible victory. And it didn't just save England, it was a massive shot in the arm for national pride. It basically announced to the world, hey, England is here and we are a force to be reckoned with.
All right, so with that political stability finally locked in, 2 other forces were coming together to create the perfect storm for a cultural revolution. First, a totally new way of thinking was sweeping across Europe. And second, a game-changing new technology was about to put those ideas into the hands of, well, pretty much everyone.
First up, humanism. Now, this was a massive intellectual shift. I mean, radical. Scholars started digging up all these old Greek and Roman texts, and suddenly the focus wasn't just on God and the afterlife. It shifted to, well, us, to human potential, to individual experience, to the power of our own minds. The big question was no longer just, what does God want? It was also, hey, what can a person achieve?
And humanism had the ultimate megaphone, the printing press. You can really think of it as the 15th century internet. It meant that these new ideas, and all the old classical ones too, could be copied and spread on a massive scale. All of a sudden, knowledge wasn't just locked away with the super rich anymore. This technology helped standardize the English language and sparked a huge jump in the number of people who could actually read.
So let's recap. You've got a stable country, you've got a public that is hungry for new ideas, and you've got the tech to spread those ideas far and wide. So what do you get when you mix all that together? An absolute explosion of literature. And right at the heart of this explosion was poetry.
which writers began using in ways that were totally new, totally bold, and pretty revolutionary. The creative energy of the time was just electric, and you can actually see it in these public debates poets would have with each other, in verse. It's amazing. So, for example, Christopher Marlowe writes this gorgeous, super idealistic poem from a shepherd who's like, "Come live with me and be my love. It'll be perfect." But then Sir Walter Raleigh comes back with this sharp, witty, kind of cynical reply from the woman's point of view, basically saying, "Yeah, right, if everything you said were true, then maybe I'd consider it." This isn't just poetry, it's a public debate, brimming with intelligence.
And out of all this literary energy, a really profound new idea starts to emerge. See, in a world where life was often pretty short and frankly brutal, poets got obsessed with this absolutely radical concept, that their art could actually conquer death itself. They started to argue that through their poems, they could make human beauty and love last forever.
And of course, who said it best? Shakespeare. In his famous Sonnet 18, he ends it by saying that as long as people can read this poem, the beauty of the person he's writing to will live on. The poem itself becomes this life-giving monument that defeats time. It's an incredibly bold and beautiful claim to make.
And Shakespeare wasn't the only one thinking this way, not by a long shot. Here's another giant from that time, Edmund Spenser, and he's making a very similar promise to his love. He says his poetry will eternalize her virtues and write her name up in the heavens. This whole idea that simple words on a page could grant you immortality was a core belief for the Renaissance poet.
So, we've seen the chaos, the stability that followed, and the huge revolutions in both thinking and technology. Let's pull all these pieces together and see how they combine to create a true golden age.
When you lay it all out like this, the formula becomes crystal clear. You needed that foundation of peace and national pride from Elizabeth's reign. Then, you needed to stir in the intellectual curiosity that was sparked by humanism. And finally, you needed the catalyst, the democratizing power of the printing press. Together, those ingredients created the perfect, fertile ground for the incredible cultural explosion of the English Renaissance.
The poets of the Renaissance genuinely believed their words could outlast empires. They were using ink and paper to fight a war against time itself. Which kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. In our digital world of fleeting posts and endless data streams, what are the tools we're using today to make our ideas, our art, and our stories immortal?